Well, I wasn't expecting that. Was pretty much my reaction with every passing chapter of the manga Dorohedoro. Little bit of background, when the anime adaptation of Dorohedoro first dropped on Netflix, I watched the trailer, I saw some stills, I saw people talk about it online, and I just wasn't in the right headspace to watch or read something like this, something that looked so bleak and dark and dismal and bloody. I needed, at the time, more happy, campy, fun, colourful things, and so I just shelved it. But I always had it at the back of my mind, and I finally checked out the manga. At the time of recording, I've read the first 2 volumes, which I think is the first 12 chapters of Dorohedoro, and it's really great. Dorohedoro is created by mangaka Q Hayashida, and she has been working on this manga for like 20 years now. The English adaptation is done by a company of localizers in Japan who are owned and run and operated by Matt Alt. If you don't know who Matt Alt is, he wrote the book Pure Invention, which is one of my favorite non-fiction books about Japanese history and culture. It's a book that explores how Japanese pop culture came to be from World War II to today. It covers toys and games and anime and manga, kawaii culture, karaoke machines, everything. And it combines that history with the economic and political growth of Japan through the 20th century. It really is a riveting book. So he's a really cool and interesting guy, and he and his team localized and translated Dorohedoro all the way through, from chapter 1 right until where we are today. And they've done such a good job with the translation. So what is Dorohedoro about? If you haven't read it or watched the anime adaptation, which by the way I have not watched the anime yet. I probably will after I've read a few more volumes of the manga, but I wanted to get deep involved in the manga before I turn to the anime. If you don't know anything about it, Dorohedoro is very much in the vein of the kind of 80s and 90s and early 2000s Vertigo comics from DC. Comics like The Sandman and Transmetropolitan. It has a gritty, nasty, grimy vibe to it with really surreal and monstrous things that happen, a lot of body horror, a lot of gore, and it's drawn with a lot of grittiness. I absolutely adored it. I was so ready for something that had this kind of body horror, monstrous quality to it. It's very punk. I love punk literature, I love punk manga and comics, and Dorohedoro is very punk. It tells the story of this guy called Kaiman. Maybe it's Kaiman? I should have looked at the katakana. Anyway, I'm gonna say Kaiman. This guy has a big lizard head. Kaiman lives in a rundown shanty city called The Hole. I assume it's in a post-apocalyptic future, although it's never clear, because there's so much Japanese culture that is injected all the way through it, so I assume it's some post-apocalyptic future. And this guy Kaiman has a big lizard head. This was caused by a sorcerer, but he doesn't know who. He has amnesia, he's been transformed partially into a lizard, and he wants to know who did it. The city he lives in, The Hole, is full of humans, but there is also another world, another realm, if you like, that is occupied by these sorcerers. And lately, sorcerers have been coming to The Hole through magic portals that they can make and experimenting on people. And Kaiman is not the only one to have animal transfiguration happen to him, but he's big and strong, tough and angry, and he has amnesia, and he wants to know who did it. When the manga begins, he has a sorcerer gangster's head in his mouth. And right from the beginning, we learn through the eyes of that sorcerer who's got his head in this lizard man's mouth, that down Kaiman's throat exists a human head. And this human head pops up out of the throat and talks to the person who's currently trapped in the lizard man's mouth and looks at him and just says the phrase, "You aren't the one." So this strange human head trapped in the lizard man's throat knows who did this transformation memory loss thing to Kaiman. But Kaiman, Lizard Man, doesn't. And Kaiman has to wonder, am I Lizard Man? Am I the true Kaiman? Or is this strange human head man trapped in my throat? Is he the real Kaiman? So you got a little bit of existentialism going on there, nothing too deep. What's really deep though is the world building. It's fantastically done. Q Hayashida has done wonders with her world building. She has created this gritty, nasty, grimy, seedy place. When you think of sorcerers, you usually think of wizard types, Gandalfs and Dumbledores, etc. These sorcerers are not like that. These sorcerers are basically kind of Yakuza gangsters. They are really horrible people who use their sorcerer powers for experimentation and to gather power and abuse that power. And the way that their magic works, and this is part of the world building, is that they expel smoke out of their fingertips, and this smoke is a kind of magic. And the more smoke they can conjure, the more magic they can do. And one of the standard magic spells is conjuring up these doors that kind of look like the doors from Monsters, Inc. That's kind of how it feels like it works. And they step through these doors from the sorcerer dimension into the whole, and there they do criminal things and experimentation. So Kaiman is after the sorcerer that did this to him. And helping him is a young woman called Nikaido. Nikaido runs a restaurant where she makes gyoza, and Kaiman is obsessed with these gyoza. But she's also big and tough and strong and really, really fun. There is a comedy dynamic between these two that I did not expect. When I went into this, it was immediately as dark and grimy and gritty and nasty as I thought it would be, and then the comedy starts. The banter between Kaiman and Nikaido is absolutely brilliant. The two of them are perfectly matched in terms of their personalities and their outlook on life to create a lot of really nice, simple, heartfelt comedy moments, and I really enjoyed them. In fact, as you read more and more chapters of Dorohedoro, it becomes funnier and funnier, especially when we get introduced to our other small group of characters. Kaiman and Nikaido are from the whole, but we also get introduced to a small group of gangster sorcerers from the sorcerer realm. One is this pathetic, wormy weasel of a guy who was the partner of the one that Kaiman kills at the very beginning. And he kind of runs off, he reports to the big Yakuza boss, and then he ends up being this sidekick to this pair of cleaners. The cleaners are called Noi and Shin. Noi is a woman, Shin is a guy. They are both big, beefy, strong sorcerers. They are very much like Cha-Cha and Hazel from Umbrella Academy, if you've watched Umbrella Academy. I haven't read the comic. I owned it for years and I never read it. Sorry, Gerard Way, I really should have read your comic. Not that he watches this, but I'm a big Gerard Way fan and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Cha-Cha and Hazel, Noi and Shin. If you've seen Umbrella Academy, you'll get kind of what these two people are like. And again, the comedy stylings of these two characters, the way that they interact with each other. All of these sorcerers also wear masks, and every mask is a little bit weird. Shin's mask looks like a gimp mask a little bit, and Noi's is a... No, it's the other way around. Noi wears the gimp mask. Is that right? Can't remember now. One of them wears the gimp mask, and the other one wears a mask that looks like an anatomical heart, and it's horrible to look at. And it sometimes gets a bit tattered as they fight and brawl, and so it kind of looks even more horrible as it goes. So this world building about two different dimensions, and the way that the magic system works, and the fact that sorcerers are basically Yakuza gangsters, it's all really so well done, and the world only grows from there. The art helps with this so much. Q Hayashida draws in a very haphazard, sketchy, rough and raw kind of a way. It kind of reminds me of early chapters of Berserk, where Kentaro Miura was still finding his feet, and he started at such a young age. It was really amazing. But just like Berserk, it begins looking kind of raw, but also hyper detailed. Dorohedoro is messy, but in a very controlled way. And you can tell, even though Q Hayashida's art seems a little bit raw, it's intentional, because the amount of detail that she pours into her scenes is absolutely ridiculous. In that very traditional manga sense where two characters are talking, maybe they're sitting at a table or a bar, and the background is just white because the background for that particular panel or set of panels isn't really important. This doesn't happen. Q Hayashida fills every panel with incredible amounts of detail, and there's no raw blacks and whites in this manga. It's all greys. And I guess metaphorically that works for the grayness, morality-wise, of the manga. But there's so much hatching and shading and messiness in these grey scribbles. But again, it's all intentional. She's filled every panel with so much detail, you can tell that it's all done on purpose. This is how she wants to communicate this world to you. This is her style, and it works well. Although, after I read Volume 2, I will say that I did notice a slight tightening up of the art as it went. A little bit less of an eyesore. I actually found when I read Volume 1 that my eyes kind of hurt trying to take in all the detail. You're kind of looking through the mire to get to the detail, and it kind of hurts your eyes, and that happened less so in Volume 2, so it has tightened up over time, I guess, but it still maintains that look about it. She's also really good at considering perspective. There are panels that look like they were seen through a fisheye lens, where the world looks a little bit warped, and I love that warped aspect. I think it works brilliantly. You also get a lot of shots that kind of look like, if it was filmed, the camera was on the ground, kind of looking up at everything, making everything seem larger than life and as if it's all going to crumble in on you. There's a lot of really good perspectives like that. Fight scenes, especially in the second volume that I read, there are more fight scenes and they're really messy. You know, they're just fists flying everywhere and lines drawn in a very scattered way, but they work well enough and they are still entertaining. Nikaido in particular, she is a lot of fun to read in that regard. Her fight scenes are fantastic fun, and she has a wonderful, positive, upbeat personality that mixes well with her hardiness. She's impossible to hurt, to injure. She's so big and tough. And Kaiman negates magic, so he can stand up to sorcerers. That's his special power. That's kind of the trade-off. He looks like a lizard and he has no memory, but at least he can kind of fight hand to hand with the sorcerers. Their magic won't touch him. Nikaido herself also has a secret when it comes to her abilities, but I won't tell you about that because that kind of is a spoiler. They're a fantastic pair, as are Shin and Noi on the other side. Shin and Noi come repeatedly to blows with Kaiman and Nikaido, and their interactions are, again, really fun. There's also one other sorcerer who gets introduced, and Kaiman comes close to thinking that perhaps she is the one that did that to him, but before he can find out, he accidentally rips her face off while she's being pulled through a magic door, and that's where the comedy of her character starts. Her name's Ebisu, and she is this tiny petite little sorcerer who constantly gets killed or mauled or destroyed over and over again, to the point that she's now just a shell of herself. Over and over, she gets broken into pieces and torn to shreds, and then poorly fixed by the other sorcerers. There's nothing left of her mind, but they keep her around, and so she becomes this very dark, black comedy punchline. Not everyone is going to like it. I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. The way that she's used as a punchline in the darkest way is brilliant, over and over again. And she just wears this skull mask all the time, and so that blank skull expression also adds to her comedy. I think she's a brilliant character, even though she has no character. The situations she finds herself in are always funny. It's amazing how Q Hayashida manages to combine the dark and bleak comedy aspects with the dark and bleak world, which is definitely not funny in and of itself. There is darkness and bleakness in her sense of humor and in the world she has created. I find that amazing. The comedy is bleak and the world is bleak. They're different types of bleak, but they still are bleak. Therefore, they are kind of copacetic. They work together really well. And it also keeps you from feeling too exhausted by just how grimy and punky and nasty the world of Dorohedoro is. Even in terms of its body horror, decapitations, faces being pulled off, there's sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a sense of comedy about it. In Volume 2, something happens to Kaiman that is physically horrendous. To look at it in the manga, it's horrible. But he kind of treats it in a offhand, jovial, funny way, and so you kind of see the funny side from his perspective, even though you might uncomfortably think that you shouldn't be laughing. He kind of says, don't worry reader, it's okay, you can laugh. Dorohedoro is so much fun in terms of its world building, its character writing, its relationships, and its humor. And I can't imagine where it's going to go. There are so many volumes. I've read the first 2. I think there are like 20. It's been going for 20 years, stopping and starting and reliably being translated by Matt Alt's company. I can't wait to see what I'm going to read in volumes 3, 4, 5, and so on. I might do another video, we'll see. But Dorohedoro is a fantastic manga. I'll check out the anime soon. If you haven't read it, if you like punk and dark and gritty, crime, magic, cyberpunk kind of stuff, you're gonna love Dorohedoro. It's so great. Q Hayashida is brilliant. Matt Alt's translation is amazing. Check it out and subscribe for books.